One important fact of the switch to Gradle in Android Studio is that Gradle is now the single authoritative source for your build. Android Studio delegates everything to Gradle when it does its builds. Let's see how this works. I'm going to demonstrate this by running the build in an emulator from the IDE and then turning around and running the build from the command line. So here's a sample project with a simple Gradle build. Let's run it in an emulator. So here we see our sample application. It's a very basic application that just has a drop-down navigation. Right now if you choose section 3, it shows 3. This is a very basic application. We created it using a wizard in Android Studio. Now what we just did is Android Studio ran the Gradle build, it created the APK, and then it installed it on the emulator. Let's do the same thing from the command line. First, let's go to a terminal. This is the project directory. Since we're using Gradle wrapper, we got to run the Gradle wrapper. Gradle wrapper will install Gradle automatically for you if you don't have it already installed. This means you don't have to go download and install Gradle. You don't have to set an environment variable. All you need to do is run Gradle W. Let's run clean. Clean is going to delete the build for us. There we go. So we ran clean. Let's go back to our IDE just to check to see what happened. Notice that the build directory is gone. The APK that we generated with Android Studio is no longer available. At this point, I'd like to remove the sample application from the emulator. So to do that, I'm going to run ADB. So ADB is installed in the SDK directory of the Android Studio application. SDK/platform-tools, ADB shell. I'm going to start the shell. I'm going to do a pm list packages. Here, if we go to our emulator, here we see that the sample app here, the sample application is installed here, and we see that the package is installed here. So pm uninstall com.gradleware.sample. That should uninstall the application, and it does. So now we know we have an emulator, the application is not installed, and if I just exit that shell, I'm going to run Gradle W package debug. So there's a debug package, there's a release package. The debug package is what I'm going to build and deploy to my emulator. So there it is, 5.147 seconds. And that build is the exact same build as the build that ran in the IDE. That's critical. It's critical because you can take the IDE build, you can run it on the command line, and know that the build output, the APK, is going to be the same. So let's take that APK from the command line, let's install it on the emulator. So to do that, we need to run the install command here. So I've already typed it in. It's the ADB install, and then I point to the build output that I just created with Gradle from the command line. If I install that, we go over to our emulator. We're going to see that the sample app shows up here. I click on the sample app, and there it is. So what I've demonstrated to you here is that you can do the same thing from the IDE that you can do from the command line, and it's the same process. It's the same build. There's no longer a difference between the build from your IDE and the build that you run on the command line. I also demonstrated the fact that you didn't have to download and install Gradle. You didn't have to configure any environment variables. It all just works because it's using the Gradle wrapper.